What do you do when the angel who guards you has been guarding a secret? Oh, I feel this in my spirit. You see, family. Every one of us walks through seasons where heaven seems silent, where even the light bearer hides a mystery behind the veil. It's like Job, sitting in ashes, asking, God, what are you doing behind my back? Yet it was in that silence that God was orchestrating his restoration. Somebody here today has mistaken divine secrecy for divine absence. But what if heaven's silence is not rejection? It's preparation. Because there are things being hidden for you, not from you. And what I'm about to reveal to you about this could shift your perspective forever. But you must watch this video until the very end. Don't skip. What do you do when heaven goes quiet? When the angels that once sang victory over your life suddenly fall silent, and the echo of your own prayers is the only sound left. We are creatures addicted to noise, feedback, confirmation, validation. We crave signs. But the divine, my friends, does not always traffic in immediacy. The universe, God the source, however one names that eternal intelligence, often speaks in the language of delay, silence, and hidden motion. Think of Daniel, fasting for 21 days, wondering why his prayer had not been answered. He did not know that an unseen war was raging in the spiritual realm, that his answer had been dispatched the very moment he spoke. Yet between earth and heaven resistance rose. The Archangel Michael was contending unseen, and Daniel, in his humanity, mistook that pause for neglect. We all do. We ask, why is God hiding from me? When the truth is, He is hiding something for you. You see, the silence of heaven is not the absence of activity. It is the perfection of timing. The seed beneath the soil hears no applause, feels no sunlight, but still the mystery of life unfolds within its darkness. You too are in that sacred soil. You too are being grown in a silence that feels like abandonment but is actually preparation. The angels are not absent. They are simply quiet while the architecture of your destiny is being set in place. Imagine a sculptor in a dimly lit room, chiseling stone. The sound of the hammer is all you hear, but you cannot yet see the shape taking form. Would you interrupt him because you don't understand his rhythm? Yet that's what many of us do with the divine process. We mistake the noise of shaping for the silence of indifference. The Spirit whispers, "Be still. Let me finish the masterpiece before you call it meaningless." Even the Christ experienced this mystery. Hanging on the cross, he cried, "My God, why have you forsaken me?" And yet, in that very moment of divine silence, redemption was being sealed for all time. Heaven was not ignoring him. Heaven was aligning history around him. So when you feel unheard, unseen, uncertain, remember God is not ignoring you. He's orchestrating something so vast that your mind could not contain it if he told you now. What if the very delay you resent is the space in which the miracle matures? What if your unanswered prayer is simply waiting for your character to catch up with its weight? The universe often tests whether you can carry what you've asked for. And sometimes the test is silence. It is the divine's way of saying, "Row. Become ready." So perhaps the real question is not, why is the angel silent? But what am I meant to hear in this quiet? For silence is never empty. It hums with hidden meaning. It teaches the soul to listen beyond sound, to sense movement beneath stillness. It is in that stillness that you begin to perceive that life itself is a conversation. One where even pauses are sacred. And so, when your spirit trembles under the weight of divine secrecy, breathe. Trust the unseen. The same hand that painted galaxies is still guiding your story, even in its quiet chapters. The heavens are not mute, they are mid-sentence. Because sometimes, the loudest voice of God is silence itself. There is a strange paradox in the way the divine works. How the very things we think are hidden from us are often the things being preserved for us. We imagine secrecy as distance, as if heaven has drawn its curtains and left us in the dark. But the truth is far more mysterious and merciful. What is hidden is not lost. It is being safeguarded in the folds of time until we are mature enough to bear its light without being blinded by it. Consider the child who demands to drive a car before they can reach the pedals. The loving parent does not deny the child's desire to move forward but delays the moment until readiness has ripened. The gift withheld is not punishment, it is protection. In the same way, the universe, or God, or whatever name you whisper for that great intelligence, withholds revelation until it will serve your evolution rather than destroy your innocence. Think of Moses, hidden in a basket among the reeds. To the casual eye it was a desperate act of concealment, yet behind that concealment was divine choreography. Pharaoh's house would raise the very one destined to confront him. What looked like secrecy was salvation wearing a disguise. How often have you misread your own concealment? You call it stagnation, invisibility, irrelevance. But perhaps your life too is being tucked away in the bulrushes while destiny readies its stage. We live in an age obsessed with exposure. Everything must be shared, displayed, validated. We rush to announce beginnings that have not yet survived their first breath. But spiritual law is clear: what is exposed too soon loses its power. Seeds germinate underground because roots must form before fruit can sustain itself. When you are hidden, you are rooting. You are becoming capable of holding what one day bloomed through you. Sometimes the delay is not in the universe but in us. We are impatient midwives of our own becoming. We want the full revelation without the full transformation. Yet revelation without readiness can ruin a soul. That's why even Jesus, who knew who he was, still lived 30 silent years before stepping into public light. The delay was not denial, it was design. It was preparation. He was learning carpentry, conversation, humanity. The divine was being seasoned through the human. And so must we be. So when the voice within you says, "Why am I being overlooked?" realize that invisibility is often heaven's training ground. Hidden seasons teach you how to hear without applause, how to act without approval, how to trust without confirmation. When your motives are refined by silence, you emerge uncorrupted by the need to perform. Only then can you handle visibility without losing authenticity. Imagine for a moment a pearl forming inside an oyster. It begins as irritation, a wound. But time and pressure transform that wound into something luminous. If the oyster were opened too early, the pearl would never have been born. Likewise, your pain is incubating radiance. But only if you stay long enough in the dark for transformation to complete its work. Do not rush the process. There are treasures growing in you that would crumble under premature exposure. Even the universe itself began in darkness. The Big Bang emerged from a void, a silence pregnant with potential. Light was hidden until the moment of divine timing. So why do we fear our own shadows? Every darkness in your life is a womb in disguise. Every concealment carries a secret, something sacred being shaped beyond your awareness. When you begin to understand this, you stop striving to force the revelation. You start resting in the knowing that what is meant for you cannot miss you. The secret is not that God is withholding your destiny. It's that He's maturing you to meet it. Hiddenness is not punishment, it is preparation in perfect disguise. So the next time life conceals its answers and heaven closes its curtains, smile softly. Something holy is happening behind the veil, and when the time is right, what was hidden for you will emerge radiant and ready. Because the universe never hides to harm, it hides to heal. The light you've been searching for is already forming in the dark. There is a war going on, but not the kind you can see. It doesn't play out in headlines or battlefields, but in the quiet corridors of thought, in the subtle tensions that pull at the strings of your soul. Most people think conflict is only physical, arguments, politics, economics, but the deepest struggles are unseen. The ancients spoke of powers and principalities, of invisible realms where light and shadow wrestle for influence. But even without that language, we know the feeling, those days when you wake up weary without reason, when the air seems heavy, when fear whispers that you are alone. What we call spiritual warfare isn't about winged creatures and flaming swords, it's about consciousness, about awareness itself. You are constantly surrounded by invisible forces, not external enemies, but inner distortions, doubt, fear, resentment, self-condemnation. These are the true adversaries. They are the storms that seek to drown the soul before it learns to breathe underwater. The story of Daniel gives us a window into this mystery. He prayed, and for 3 weeks nothing happened. Unseen to him, an angelic messenger was delayed, wrestling with resistance in another dimension. Only later did Daniel learn that his prayer had been heard from the beginning. Isn't that astonishing? The moment he spoke, heaven moved, but between the promise and the manifestation there was interference. That interference still exists. Not as myth but as metaphor. There are moments in every life where what is meant for you seems delayed, where clarity becomes cloudy, where you wonder if your efforts have evaporated into the void. But what if, just like Daniel, the answer is already on its way, merely contending with invisible resistance? There's a battlefield inside your mind where faith and fear both fight for dominance. Every time you choose patience over panic, forgiveness over bitterness, you are participating in that war. Every moment you hold your peace when provoked, you are declaring victory in an invisible realm. You are not just surviving, you are shifting the atmosphere around you. Sometimes, the most dangerous battles are not fought against others but within yourself. You can appear calm to the world and still be in the middle of a storm that no one else perceives. The war is often between who you were and who you're becoming. The old self resists its own evolution. The ego fights to preserve its comfort, even as the soul reaches for freedom. This is the battlefield Michael stands upon, the symbolic guardian of awakening consciousness, defending the birth of clarity within chaos. When you pray, when you meditate, when you breathe through suffering instead of reacting, you're calling for reinforcements. But here's the paradox: the battle doesn't end with fighting. It ends with surrender. Not defeat, but a surrender of illusion. You begin to see that darkness has no substance apart from your belief in it. Shadows exist only where light is obstructed. The moment you move the obstruction, the fear, the anger, the attachment, the shadow dissolves. The war was never between light and dark, it was between awareness and ignorance. So when life feels heavy, when obstacles multiply and silence stretches thin, remember that your prayer was heard the moment it left your lips. What you're waiting for is already in motion, contending on your behalf in dimensions you cannot see. The delays are not denials, they are negotiations in the unseen. The forces that oppose you are not punishments but teachers, sculpting endurance, refining faith, teaching you how to stand in peace while the storm still rages. The unseen battlefield isn't there to break you. It's there to awaken you, to show you that victory isn't about conquering the world but mastering yourself. Every struggle, every resistance, is an invitation to consciousness, to remember who you truly are beyond the noise, beyond the fear, beyond the illusion of separation. The war will end not when you fight harder, but when you see clearly. Because the moment you awaken, the battlefield disappears. We often believe that interruptions are failures, that delays mean something has gone wrong. Yet life, in its infinite wisdom, rarely unfolds according to our tidy schedules. There's a rhythm at work deeper than our plans, a pulse beneath the noise, and sometimes that rhythm slows us down, not to frustrate us but to form us. The divine doesn't always move in straight lines. It meanders like a river, winding through valleys we didn't intend to enter, carving patience into the landscape of our souls. When we speak of delay, we usually think of waiting rooms and wasted time. But what if delay is not an obstacle, it's an initiation? What if interruption is simply instruction dressed in disguise? We are so accustomed to measuring progress by movement that we forget stillness is also motion in another language. Waiting is not idleness when the waiting itself is shaping you. Think of David, the shepherd boy anointed to be king. The oil flowed over his head, yet the throne was years away. Between the promise and the fulfillment stretched deserts, caves, and countless nights of hiding from Saul. He was chosen, yes, but he was also chased, and it was in those hidden caves, not the palace halls, that his heart learned leadership. The interruption of his ascent became the instruction of his character. Without the waiting, the crown would have crushed him. Life works the same way. You think you're being delayed, but you're being developed. You think you're being detoured, but you're being directed. Every pause contains a purpose. The job that didn't come through, the relationship that ended abruptly, the door that never opened. These are not accidents, they are refinements. The universe, in its subtle humor, loves to reroute us just when we think we've mastered the map. Because the destination was never merely a location. It was a transformation. In our impatience, we tend to shout at heaven, "Why me? Why now?" But a more fruitful question is, what is this teaching me? The delay becomes sacred the moment you start listening instead of complaining. That's when the lesson appears. Maybe it's teaching you to trust timing rather than forcing outcomes. Maybe it's cultivating empathy so that when your blessing finally arrives, you'll recognize the pain in others still waiting. Or maybe it's simply building the muscle of surrender, the capacity to rest in what is rather than obsess over what's missing. Even nature preaches this wisdom. A seed doesn't sprout the instant it touches soil. It rests in darkness, softens and breaks before life emerges. To the impatient eye nothing is happening. But beneath the surface everything is. The shell must crack for growth to begin. Likewise, the moments that feel like your breaking point are often your becoming point. Delay is not denial, it's germination. So perhaps the interruptions in your path are not interruptions at all. They're the curriculum of your evolution. The divine doesn't waste time, it repurposes it. Every detour is a disguised direction, every pause a preparation for deeper perception. The question is not, when will I get there? But, who will I be becoming while I wait? There's a quiet kind of wisdom that arrives only through patience. It doesn't shout or perform, it simply whispers. All things unfold when they are ripe. If you can trust that ripening, if you can learn to see delays as divine timing instead of divine rejection, you'll find peace even in the in-between. Because the truth is, the universe is never late. It's just teaching you to dance to a rhythm you haven't yet learned to hear. The delay is not here to hold you back. It's here to hold you steady until you're ready to move. There are moments in life when what was meant to protect you begins to feel like it's holding you hostage. The walls that once offered safety start to feel like prisons. You pray for freedom, for newness, for change. But the answer that comes is often not a removal of walls, but a command to walk around them. This is one of the most misunderstood aspects of spiritual growth, that protection and restriction can be the same thing, depending on where you stand in your becoming. Think of Jericho. The people of Israel stood before massive walls, impenetrable, unmoving. They had just come from the wilderness, carrying promises but not yet possessing them. And instead of tearing down the walls himself, God gave an instruction that must have sounded absurd: march around them. Don't speak, just walk. 7 days of walking in circles, of doing the same thing again and again with no visible result. It must have felt like futility. But it was obedience disguised as repetition. Faith disguised as silence. The walls weren't there to defeat them, they were there to train them. How many times in your own life have you mistaken divine training for divine punishment? You cry out, "Why is this happening to me?" And heaven whispers back, "Because I'm preparing you to carry what's coming." The walls you face, the limitations, the waiting, the seeming stagnation, are often the very structures that refine your endurance, discipline, and trust. They test whether you can be consistent when the outcome isn't immediate, whether you can follow instructions when emotions scream for shortcuts. The truth is, no one ever marches around Jericho without wanting to quit. Every human being reaches a point where the seventh day feels impossible, where you're tired of circling what hasn't moved. But that's the essence of faith. It asks you to keep walking when logic says stop. It's in that final lap, the one you almost didn't take, that the vibration of persistence begins to crack what once seemed solid. Restriction, then, becomes revelation. You start to see that the wall was never your enemy, it was your mirror. It reflected your impatience, your disbelief, your need for control. Every lap around it softened you, shaped you, prepared you. Sometimes what you call resistance is actually rehearsal. The very things that seem to block your way are the teachers assigned to your growth. There is something profoundly humbling about realizing that God doesn't always remove the obstacle. Sometimes He asks you to learn its rhythm. March around it, observe it, live beside it, until you understand that the wall is not keeping you out. It's keeping you in long enough to evolve. Because if the walls fall too soon, you enter unready. You step into promise with wilderness habits. You inherit blessings with untempered egos. The delay, the circling, the repetition, it is all grace in disguise. Every life has its Jericho, a dream deferred, a healing delayed, a situation that refuses to budge. The lesson is not in conquering it, but in learning to trust the process that encircles it. The act of walking, again and again, builds a rhythm of faith that eventually shakes loose the unseen. The power is not in the shout at the end. It's in the quiet endurance of every step before it. And then, without warning, the walls that once loomed large begin to tremble. Not because of noise or force, but because of resonance. You've aligned your frequency with faith. The vibration of trust has reached its critical mass. And suddenly, what was once a barrier becomes a bridge. The walls that confined you crumble into the very ground you now stand victorious upon. So if you find yourself marching in circles, take heart. You are not trapped. You are being tuned. The walls are not against you, they are working for you. Preparing to fall at the precise moment when your spirit has learned their song. Because sometimes, faith isn't about fighting the wall. It's about walking until the wall remembers who you are. There are seasons when you will look around and swear you've been abandoned. The prayers seem to vanish into the air. The signs go silent. And even the scriptures you once clung to feel lifeless in your hands. You start to wonder if heaven has turned its face away. But perhaps the feeling of abandonment is not proof of God's absence, but the echo of your own awakening. Because when all outer assurances fade, the soul is forced to find what was always within. Job knew this. He lost everything: his wealth, his health, his children, his peace. And still he sat there, scraping his wounds, asking questions that had no answers. The silence that followed must have felt unbearable. Yet it was in that silence that revelation ripened. For God never explained himself to Job, he simply revealed his vastness. He didn't say, "Here's why you suffered." But, "Where were you when the stars were hung?" The lesson wasn't explanation. It was expansion. The pain that felt like rejection became the pathway to awe. This is the secret most people never learn: feelings are real. But they are not reliable narrators of truth. You can feel forsaken and still be held. You can feel lost while walking the exact path meant for you. Emotions are waves, but they are not the ocean itself. They rise, they crash. They pass, and beneath them, a still current remains unchanged. The spiritual journey is not about denying emotion, but about learning to see through it. To look at despair and say, "I see you, but you are not the whole story." When life grows dark, we tend to magnify the shadows. But the presence of a shadow only proves there is light nearby. The question is not, "Where is God?" but "Where am I placing my gaze?" When you fixate on what's missing, you feed emptiness. When you shift your eyes toward gratitude, you begin to notice small embers glowing in the ash. Gratitude is the lamberge that reopens your perception. The moment you begin to count the evidence of past faithfulness, moments when you were protected, guided, sustained, you start to see that the silence was never neglect, it was nurture. There's a deeper rhythm to suffering, though it's difficult to hear while you're in it. Pain, if allowed, purifies perception. It burns away illusions of control, pride, and self-sufficiency. In the fire of abandonment, the false gods of comfort are exposed for what they are: temporary, fragile, fleeting. What remains is a quiet knowing that your worth was never based on outcomes or applause. That even in the ashes you are still enough, still loved, still connected to the source that birthed stars and breathes through your lungs. We've been taught to fear emptiness, but emptiness is sacred space. It's the clearing where new awareness is born. The dark night of the soul isn't a punishment, it's a purification, an unlearning of what cannot last. It strips you of illusion until you discover that you were never truly alone. Because the very awareness that observes your loneliness is the same divine presence you thought you'd lost. The observer is the evidence of the divine. So when you find yourself crying into the void, know this: the void is listening. It is not mocking you, it is mirroring you. Every unanswered prayer, every quiet hour, every ache is not proof of absence but of intimacy. The divine hides not to torment, but to train your sight to recognize presence without form, love without condition, peace without proof. What you think is abandonment is often an invitation to stop searching for God outside and start seeing God within. The silence you fear is not empty. It's full of whispers waiting for your stillness. Because what feels like divine absence is often just love in its most unrecognizable form, teaching you to see that you were never separate at all. Every sword, no matter how sharp, is useless without the hand that knows when to draw it. Power without discipline becomes destruction. Passion without wisdom becomes chaos. The true art of living is to balance the sword and the strategy, to carry both fire and focus in the same breath. We spend so much of our lives fighting shadows, thinking every difficulty is an enemy. But not every battle needs a blade. Some wars are won by stillness, by discernment, by knowing when to move and when to wait. The Archangel with the flaming sword is not merely a warrior, he is a guardian of order. His strength is not in the violence of his swing but in the clarity of his purpose. And so it is with us. Strength, when aligned with wisdom, becomes sacred. You see, the sword represents truth, sharp, precise, uncompromising. It cuts away illusion, exposes the false, divides what is real from what is merely noise. But if truth is not guided by compassion, it wounds rather than heals. That's why strategy is just as essential as strength. The strategy is awareness. It asks, where should I aim this energy? What serves growth? And what merely feeds ego? Without that awareness, we become warriors swinging wildly at everything that challenges our comfort. Life, in its strange humor, will often test your readiness by sending you people and situations that provoke your old reactions. You'll think you're fighting them, but really you're fighting yourself. Your pride, your impatience, your need to be right. The real battlefield is not out there, it's within. The sword must first turn inward, not to destroy but to discern. To separate your true self from the armor you've worn for survival. Strategy begins the moment you stop reacting and start responding. Reaction is the language of fear, response is the voice of wisdom. When you pause before you strike, you invite grace into motion. You stop being a participant in chaos and become a conductor of clarity. You learn that silence can be sharper than speech. That peace can be stronger than defense. There's a practical side to this too. Balance is not just a poetic idea, it's a rhythm you cultivate. You pray like everything depends on heaven, but you pray like everything depends on you. You keep your heart open to the unseen, but your hands grounded in the present. You surround yourself with accountability, with people who tell you the truth when flattery would be easier. You create boundaries not to shut people out, but to protect what's sacred within. The sword is strength, the strategy is stewardship. And there will be moments when you are called to act, to speak, to defend something precious. But even then your power must flow through love, not fear. When you fight from anger, you exhaust yourself. When you act from awareness, you align with a current that moves effortlessly through you. It's not about domination. It's about direction. The universe rewards those who can hold both weapons and wisdom. Because mastery is not measured by how many battles you've fought, but by how many you've learned to transcend. When you know who you are, you no longer need to prove it through conflict. You stand firm, calm, unshaken. The sword remains at your side, gleaming quietly, not because you've lost your edge, but because you've found your purpose. And that, perhaps, is the secret of every true warrior of spirit, to know when to fight, and when to simply shine. For the strongest soul is not the one who conquers others, but the one who has learned to wield his own fire without being burned. There comes a point in every journey where what was once concealed begins to stir beneath the surface, trembling toward revelation. The long silence, the delays, the battles, the waiting, all of it begins to make sense, like a symphony that finally resolves its tension in one grand, resounding chord. What you thought was hidden from you was actually hidden for you, growing quietly in the secret chambers of time until you were ready to see it without distorting it. This is the moment of unveiling, the moment when heaven's mystery turns into earth's manifestation. It rarely happens dramatically. More often, it begins with a whisper, an inner knowing, a sudden peace, a realization that the thing you feared losing was never lost at all. Revelation doesn't rush, it ripens. And when it does, you understand that every unanswered prayer, every silent night, every shadowed season was part of a pattern too intricate to grasp while you were inside it. The divine doesn't waste movement. Every detour was a thread woven into a greater design. And the unveiling is simply the recognition that you were never outside of that design. You were always inside it, learning its rhythm. We imagine revelation as something descending from above, but often it rises from within. It's as if the curtain of perception is gently pulled aside, and you see that the stage you've been standing on the whole time was sacred ground. What you were waiting for was waiting for you. For your awareness to expand enough to hold it. The secret was never in heaven's keeping. It was in your readiness to perceive what heaven had already placed in motion. You see, what we call divine secrecy is really divine sequencing. Timing is the language of eternity speaking through the moments of our lives. Just as a flower blooms not because it decides to, but because it can no longer contain its becoming. Revelation comes when the soul can no longer hold its own light in hiding. The petals open, not out of ambition, but out of inevitability. Everything has been hidden eventually seeks expression. And what was once your confusion becomes your clarity. In this unfolding you realize something profound, that even the waiting was holy. Every tear you shed watered the ground for this moment. Every heartbreak tilled the soil of your understanding. Every loss cleared space for the new life that now emerges. The revelation is not some external event. It's you awakening to what has been true all along. You were never broken, never abandoned, never behind. You were simply being aligned. And perhaps the most humbling part of all this is that the secret heaven hid was not a secret about the world, but about you. The real unveiling is the recognition of your own divine nature, the quiet, radiant truth that you are not separate from the source that shapes your destiny. What was concealed was your own power, your own capacity to carry light without fear, to hold peace without needing proof. The Archangel's secret, as it were, was never about concealment. It was about cultivation. You had to walk through the dark to learn to see without light. When you finally reach that moment of awareness, the entire narrative shifts. You stop asking, "Why did this happen to me?" and begin whispering, "How could it have happened for me?" The same events, once viewed as misfortune, become teachers. The silence you cursed becomes sacred. You understand that revelation doesn't arrive with fanfare. It arrives with recognition. You were already standing in the answer, only now you can see it. And maybe this is what the angel meant all along. That the divine doesn't hide truth to tease us, but to prepare us. Because if we received everything before we were ready to understand it, we would mistake miracles for coincidences, and mysteries for mistakes. The secret was love in its most patient form, waiting for the moment you could finally bear its brilliance. So now, as the veil lifts and the hidden becomes clear, take a deep breath. You are standing in the revelation. Everything that was withheld was simply waiting for this instant of awakening. The secret was never about what was hidden. It was about who you were becoming while you waited to see.